Warmly welcome to all of you to this seminar organized by SweDev, the Swedish Development Research Network. It's a recently formed network. It's not officially launched yet, but will be so in February 2021. And this seminar that we will have today is a part of a two-day conference that SweDev is organizing for its steering committee and institutional members. And some of the seminars during this 2 days conference are open to people outside the SweDev network. And this seminar that we will have now is one of them. And we will look into the question on how development research is used by practitioners and policymakers. And we will start with a presentation of a study, of a draft study that is made that is looking into this question. And thereafter, we will hear from some of a number of practitioners and policymakers that will reflect upon this question as well. And at the end of the seminar, we will have a space for questions from the audience, from all of you. So be prepared. It's quite a lot of time set aside for questions from the audience at the end. My name is Kajsa Johansson, and I'm a PhD candidate at Linnaeus University. I'm also an advisor at We Effect and Viagra Forestry and the chair of Swedish Committee for Afghanistan. So I'm a person with one leg in development cooperation and one leg in development research. We would like to inform you that this seminar is being recorded. So by staying with us here, you approve to this recording, just to let you know when you see the little red light blinking in the corner there saying that it is recorded. And I think we will get started, and some practicalities maybe. As you know, it's best that we have our microphones muted when other people are talking so that we don't get an interference. If it's possible, it's very nice if you have your camera on so we get a sense of who is here and a bit more presence than just the black screens. We will try in the questions, like in the debate later on, to use the raise your hand functions. We know that in some devices, this can be really hard to find or impossible to find. So then you can also write in the chat that you would like to ask a question or make a comment. But as much as possible, we try to use that function. It's easy for us to not lose anyone on the way. So with this, I would like to invite Janet Vähämäki and Anna Jonu, both from SEI, Stockholm Environmental Institute, to make a presentation on the study that is still ongoing, I think. So please, Janet and Anna, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Kajsa. And you forgot to present that you are also a member of the SweDev steering committee. So that's in one capacity that you are the moderator there. So just to introduce myself and Anna, who is actually the main author of this study. I'm the program manager of the SweDev, and we have recently received a startup fund from SIDA for 2 years. So we are establishing the network. And one of the activities is this study to look at how development practitioners use research-based knowledge and interact with the research community. You can move forward with the PowerPoint, please. And the next one. So the background for this study was actually the idea to make a study on how practitioners use research-based knowledge was from a study that we did for EBA in April 2020, when we launched a study that mapped the other side of the coin, or the research community, and how they pursued how they are connecting and interacting with policy and practitioners. So that study, with 578 respondents, which only that shows a very high interest on the topic, that actually 578 researchers took the 15-20 minutes of time and responded to the survey, shows that they really think that this topic is important and interesting. The study had 3 main findings. One, that the research community remains highly fragmented. yet is searching for cross-collaboration between institutions. That many researchers felt that they are very isolated in their research environments and wanted to increase collaboration between each other. The second, that the field of development research is expanding and competition for funding increasing, that there are more researchers under the umbrella of development research from different disciplines and who are competing for the very limited funding in this area. And the third, that development researchers are searching for collaboration with the policymaking community. That was actually the priority number one when asking the researchers on why they thought that a network was necessary, that they felt that they are not actually getting out with their research findings to practitioners and policymakers. So in sum, that researchers do want increased interaction with practitioners, but in practice it doesn't work very well. A researcher called Court, he has said that research and practitioners live on different planets, that there is quite a lot of to do in order to increase the interaction in between them. Take the next. This was the background for why SweDev was launched, and the main purpose of SweDev is then that it's an official network to strengthen the links between development researchers, development practitioners, and policymakers. And the aim is to increase the relevance of research-based knowledge for efficient policymaking and practice among Swedish actors working for Agenda 2030. Take the next one. So how do we then pursue research-based knowledge? In the beginning, we used the term evidence-based policymaking, but we went to the term research-based knowledge, since it's a broader term and that it's not only all evidence, there's not a clear connection between evidence and policymaking. So we wanted a broader term than that. And how we then it's typically very often, and in the evidence-based policymaking paradigm, that research is very much needed it can help save lives and improve the quality of life, that you need to use research for better decision making. That's a very common paradigm, and saying that it is so. However, in practice, it's only a couple of ideas that are picked up by policymakers. It's a lot of research that is not being used at all in policymaking and practice. And why is it so? Earlier research says that it's because of the poor engagement and few interactions between researchers, practitioners, and policymakers, that research is typically not considered relevant and accessible and well communicated by the research community, and that practitioners lack time and capacity to disseminate and use research. Sometimes not using research can even deepen the problem, like the HIV/AIDS crisis, where there was a lot of research that you knew exactly what actually caused the disease, but that the research was not used by policymakers, which worsened the life, and a lot of poor people died out of the disease. You can go to next. However, there's also another part of this coin that, as I said earlier, that there's not a clear link, and you can't always think that there's one research answer to a specific problem. So it may be overestimated in its capacity to provide solutions to all development problems. And that can be sometimes the reason for why maybe practitioners think that it's not relevant, that they think that there is a possibility to have one research answer to a problem, and that there's an exact link. It's not possible to do experiments or randomized control trials or something on everything. And even though when it is, it's not possible to there's always some inadequacy in the data, and you can't say that there's one size fits all, and that the one solution is actually something that can be applied to the same problem in maybe different contexts. And often decisions are also taken by a gut feeling or intuition. So it's not so that research can always provide a solution to that, but research can be, and what SweDev then sees is that the use of research, or why research is important, that it can support reflection, spark innovation and creativity, and it can support the personal intuition and judgment, so that research can, we can become, make a better judgment, and we can make more conscious decisions if we use research. But to think that there's like one size fits all, or one research finding is supporting one problem, that's not possible. So that's a short background to our view on how we view research-based knowledge. And now Anna will take over and present some of the study findings so far.
Thank you, Janet, and welcome and good morning, everyone. It's just shortly about me. My name is Anna Joannou, and I work with learning and following up at SEI, and I previously also worked with learning and evaluation at SIDA. So I'm very much looking forward to presenting and continue working with this study. And as Janet said, I will now present the tentative preliminary findings of the online survey that makes up one part of the study. We will also do complementing interviews and have deepening discussions with other Swedish development actors. So the aim of this study, as Janet said, it's to assess how and when development practitioners and policymakers use research-based knowledge, and also when they interact with the research community in their work. And hopefully we will manage to identify promoting and constraining factors for this happening. So the findings of the study, which then will include both the interviews, but also these online survey results, that study will be discussed further with Swedish development actors and researchers, as well as feed into inspire future SweDev activities. Please change the slide. Thank you. So who are the respondents? We had 134 people answering, and as SweDev aims to enhance the connection between development research, policy and practice in Sweden, the focus has been on practitioners and policymakers working with Swedish international development or Swedish implementation of the 2030 agenda. So as you can see to the left here, the majority is from public agency, civil society and municipalities. And to the right, you can see that there are many policy officers, program managers, and heads of units and departments. And the other section includes positions and job titles such as consultants, coordinators, strategies, and advisors. So you can change slide there. So when and why is research used? So here, for these two questions, they were asked to select a maximum of 3 alternatives that they agree with. And we can see that the research is used for writing reports, taking decisions, and communicating with public or the others or other stakeholders. And using research is seen as strengthening the accuracy of one's work and also supporting one's own perspective, for example, in reports or recommendations or when arguing for something. And many also state that research is used because it generates new ideas and innovations. And as you can see there on the screen, only something that I thought was interesting and worth remembering is that only 13% mentioned that they use research because it is seen as expected by management. Please change slide there. Thank you. So how is research-based knowledge accessed? Well, to the left, we can see that having direct contact with researchers, for example, during seminars or in a network, is a common way to interact with the research community. And reading summaries of research results is also quite common, even more so than reading peer-reviewed articles, which is only done by approximately 25% of the respondents. So to the right, we can see that instead of making a search on a research database, most practitioners and policymakers search for research in Google, or using their networks or through colleagues. And several of the respondents actually described how their organization don't have an account or the possibility to pay for an account for accessing peer-reviewed articles and research databases. So they, even if they wanted to, they don't even have the possibility to access the peer-reviewed research in research databases. Can change slide there. So when asking the respondents about how they perceive research-based knowledge, the majority mentioned that it is relevant for the work and also credible. But at the same time, there seems to be room for changes in how research is communicated and made accessible, as was also mentioned by Janet, has been seen in previous studies, but also seems to be the case in the Swedish context. So as we saw in the previous slide, it's not so common to access research databases and read peer-reviewed articles as it is to read, for example, briefs and summaries of research results that you have found via Google or your networks or even via social media. And this slide here also indicates that research is perceived as difficult to implement. Several respondents mentioned that research needs to be shorter, sharper, and more to the point. And there seems to be a wish for research to draw even clearer conclusions and recommendations. Change slide there. Thank you. So what would increase the use of research-based knowledge? So I touched on this already in the previous slide, but I'll elaborate that a little bit here, and I hope you can see what it reads there. But as mentioned, research is used to some extent, and it is perceived as relevant. But there is room for improvements, and room for making research be used even more in policy and practice. So time is clearly a hindering factor. Policymakers and practitioners don't feel that they have enough time to keep up with and digest research. At the same time, using research is not perceived as important from management, or it's not perceived that management see using research as important, which partly could explain why not enough time is taken to digest and use research. And shorter research papers that are better adapted to policy and practice could increase policymakers and practitioners' use of research. Again, this could be related also to the time issue. If you have scarce amount of time, you do not feel that, and you don't feel that your management is encouraging you to use research in your work or take the time to read research, then it makes sense that shorter, more to the point research conclusions and recommendations are more attractive. And also having direct access to researchers who are expert in an area that is relevant for your work is also perceived as a possible enabler for using more research in policy and practice. And this also relates to how networks today is a common mean for accessing research, as we saw in a previous slide. And some also brought up the possibility of applied research, for which researchers are consulted or contracted to feed into and contribute to the work of practitioners and policymakers. So this is the final slide. Could you please change? Thank you so much. So some key tentative findings. Well, as mentioned, development research is perceived as both relevant and credible, and it is already used to some extent. For example, when writing reports or taking decisions. And the issue of time could be mitigated by researchers in how they communicate and package research results, making it more user-friendly, having shorter summaries or briefs with more concrete and highlighted recommendations and conclusions could be one way. And researchers could think differently in how they communicate the research, focusing more on the spaces where practitioners and policymakers are active. For example, at seminars or networks, social media, rather than research databases. However, at the same time, practitioners and policymakers need more time to really be able to read and digest and implement research. Today, this does not seem to be the case really, and it's not really seen as emphasized by management. And finally, which also fits nicely with the aim of SweDev as well, is that participating in networks and having easier access to researchers could also be an enabler for research to be used to a greater extent in policy and practice. I can change there to the final slide. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Janet and Anna. And I mean, in the presentation now, you treated more or less the policymakers, the officials, the civil society, all as one group. So can you, I know that the study is still ongoing, but could you maybe elaborate? Can we see any differences in the response from the different actors and people in different sectors and positions?
Yeah, thank you, Kajsa. Yes, there are some differences. Looking, for example, at decision makers or primary decision makers, who I perceive or assume would be, for example, heads of units and head of departments, compared to the others, if you'd group them, that in many ways it is quite similar even between these two groups. And as seen in the slides that I showed previously, that using research is important for example, making decisions. But it's for the more naturally primary decision makers, the heads of units, for example, they use research slightly more for decision making, which makes sense. But also they use it more for generating new ideas and innovations, which I thought was also interesting. And time was for both groups an issue. And a large percentage of the heads of units and departments, however, seems to interact more with researchers in the networks. And it seems to also be more common for this group to experience a little bit, or to have the experience of consulting or contracting researchers for their work. Mm-hmm. And then we also looked a little bit at the differences between civil society organizations and public organizations. Ideally, we would have looked at private actors as well, but we haven't had that many private actors responding yet to the survey, so can't really say anything there yet. But looking at the public and the civil society actors, there is a difference in how they search for research, and also how they use research. For example, CSOs tends to use research more for communicating with stakeholders and public actors, and for writing reports, whilst it is more common for public agencies to use research for project and partner assessments. And there are also differences in, as I mentioned, in how they find the research. CSOs seems to be more actively searching, for example, via Google, and finding research via social media, whilst the public agencies seems to be more relying on their networks and colleagues for finding research.
Thank you very much, Anna. Janet, do you want to add something? No, thanks. I see that you have a question in the chat. We will have a possibility for everyone to ask questions to Janet and Anna, and also the three panelists that we will shortly introduce. So I will just ask Elizabeth to hold the question, remember the question. I mean, it's there, and then we will get back to it after these short presentations. So thank you very much, Janet and Anna. And we will now turn to 3 shorter interventions by first Göran Holmqvist, who is the director for the Department of Asia, Middle East and Humanitarian Assistant at SIDA. He will start. And then we will turn to Anders Troedsson, who is a specialist at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, working at the Department for International Development Cooperation. And last of the 3 interventions, we have Peter Sörbom, who is the head of policy and advocacy at Concord, Sweden. And we've given them 8 minutes each to comment upon the study and give their reflections on their experience and thoughts on the topic on the use of research in their specific fields. So I would thereby like to welcome Göran to the stage. Please. Go ahead, Göran.
Unmuted now, right?
Yes. No, we can hear you.
Okay. First, excuse, I have a cough. We were tested in my family, so I should be on the safe side, and we don't spread the virus via the net. But maybe my voice will be a bit tricky. To start with, on my background, so I'm heading a department at SIDA covering Asia, Middle East and humanitarian support, and I've had a few similar positions previously in SIDA for other regions. And during my career, I have always sort of made this shift between SIDA and something closer to research-related institutions. So my last position was with UNICEF as head of their research department in Florence, and I spent time at the Nordic Africa Institute, and so I've taken these breaks, and every time I moved back and forth from the doer side, the doers and the policymaker side, to the research side, it's highly frustrating, I must say, each time, and I'm not at all surprised by the findings you got overall. And I think these frustrations I personally have felt probably reflects quite well the difficulties we have to connect. So when you move from the doers to more to academia or research related activities, you're highly frustrated by the lack of feeling for relevance among academia, an over obsession with the within discipline issues, the obsession to publish in peer-reviewed journal, although only 10 people read the article, and not looking beyond sometimes, and also the lack and sometimes ignorance of the reality of that bureaucrats and policymakers and doers are facing. And not always recognizing their need to make an investment in understanding that. And then when you move back to the doer side, you are equally frustrated by sort of the narrow-mindedness, the unwillingness to be questioned, the inability to take a broader view. And you're also frustrated by all the constraints that you face when you are among the doers. Time, obviously, as you pointed out in the survey, time constraint, it's a completely different pace that you face when you are sitting on the inside. It's also somehow frustrating that depending on where you are sitting, a lot of things do not become very interesting because they are shaped by constraints that are outside your control, and you focus on what's within your policy space. And that's also a frustration, that you are kind of forced to dwell on the issues which is within your space of maneuver, decisions that you somehow can influence. And that depends on where you're sitting in the organization. If you're the top level manager, or if you deal with a particular country, or even just a particular project, you will have different constraints that shape your interest and readiness to spend time on things. So my messages tend to be, you know, to academia when I move there is first of all, be ready to take the issue of relevance very seriously, and it calls for you to make an investment in understanding that really, if you want to have an impact. Don't be too stuck in your disciplines. At least be ready to engage broader and understand that if your research findings are quite partial, then the uptake will also be quite partial, because in most cases we face problems and issues that calls for some kind of interdisciplinary knowledge and sort of many pieces being brought together to actually take a final position on an issue that we face. Try to understand the policy space of the people you talk to. You have to respect that people aren't so, I mean, if you speak to a top level policymaker in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs on development aid, very partial stuff related to a particular context or a very small issue doesn't play out very much for them. And vice versa, if you bring up big policy issues, you should pick some other development partner countries. Some people wouldn't care. It's not within their sphere of influence, so they won't listen. And you have to see that. Who are you talking to? Who are you engaging with? And what are their issues? And then also understanding that many times your partial evidence is just a piece that needs by the bureaucrats and us, we need to bring it together. So we are quite interested, I would say, in many cases of the kind of efforts to synthesize research, to bring things together, not just having partial evidence from one Swedish researcher, but we want the broader picture. What does the global research community have to say on the issue of whether microfinance is good or bad? You don't look at just one research report. You look for the people who have been able to bring together the entire field into something that becomes meaningful for your policy making. And the message to the bureaucrats, I think that's mainly put yourself in the mood of a fisherman. You know, you have to sit there waiting and a lot of useless time spent, and then occasionally you catch something interesting. And that's a hard thing to preach to people who are very busy, but I think that mood needs to be in our heads, and think of it as an investment, that small pieces that maybe not so meaningful for the decisions you are going to take tomorrow might build up to something very very meaningful later on when it's combined and you are in your policy space maybe have become different. And then finally also final point then. I'm over time, right? Close to it? Tell me.
No, you still have, you can take one more minute. It's
one
fine.
more minute, good.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So maybe a final point. When I learned about this network, I thought it was excellent. I think many of us who have been working in this field, we have missed the fact that Sweden doesn't have something like ODI or Christian Mickelson or something, a place which can work as the point where sort of research is combined, translated, and becomes like a bridge between the doers community and the academia. And we don't really have that. We have a lot of interesting places who are specialized in maybe a specific region or a specific theme and so on. We don't have an ODI that in the same clear way can pull all these things together into meaningful kind of policy positions. And we are not, I would say, Sweden is not, we are punching below our, how do you say, below our waistline, right? When it comes to influencing and global agenda setting. If you look the way the UK or the World Bank is working ahead of a big conference, I mean, they set up their panel of notables, they start their research things, and they have shaped the agenda. And we just have to kind of go with the flow and relate to it. And we are not able really to make these investments to become global agenda setters in a way that I think occasionally we could. So I like the idea, and I think it's a good alternative to having the AI if we have a strong network and we build these connections and make both researchers and doers set aside the time necessary to find each other and clarify both needs and supply, so to say, that we could build on. Yeah, there's a lot to say about how that can be done. I was facing a similar kind of challenge when I was sitting in the research department of the Office of Research of UNICEF, where you have 150 country offices, a lot of people doing some pieces of research, but an organization very pushed by being a doer, saving the lives of children and so on. And research is like useless time spent, some people would say. So building that bridge in that organization was quite a challenge, but there were some interesting experiments being done. So one was showcasing the best of UNICEF research. That was like a big invitation to everybody who had done an interesting piece of research. They sent it to us, to this research department, and we had a panel who assessed it both based on quality, but also relevance and potential impact. And that sort of created a debate both among the people who engaged with the researchers and with the doers inside on what was useful, what was less useful, and this kind of showcasing exercise really played out as one of these nice bridges that connected people across the organization and created more respect also for what research can contribute to when at its best.
Thank you very much, Göran. I think we need to close, but there will also be opportunities in the aftercoming discussion to provide more examples. And I'm sure that also Anna, in the continued work with the report, is also happy to take up some of these like quite hands-on examples that you mentioned, Göran. So now we will move on to Anders Troedsson from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to hear your perspective on the question of the use of research. Please, Anders. You are now muted.
Now you hear me, I hope.
Yes, we do.
Thank you for having me on this panel. And let me say just a few words about myself. I'm responsible for the research portfolio at the Department for International Development Cooperation at the MFA. And one big issue in that portfolio is, of course, to follow up on the government's research strategy, and especially working with SweDev as a very able team in implementing this strategy. Also, the Swedish Research Council is part of this strategy. And as you know, this is the actor within Swedish research that supports Swedish development research. And
Anders, can I just ask you, do you have a microphone somewhere and maybe your hand gets in front of it? Because we hear you sometimes very well and sometimes you almost disappear. Sorry to interrupt.
Right, sorry. Maybe it's internet connection.
Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
All right. I'm actually one of the few persons at the MFA with research explicitly in my job description, which means that I'm sometimes also playing a coordinating role for research in a broader sense within the ministry. I would also like to say that not everything I will say here is necessarily representative of the MFA or the government offices, and it's partly will be personal reflections based on my professional role, but I also have a research background. I would like to say that, do you hear me now, by the way? Fine.
Yes, we hear you. It's going up and down, but we hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. I also think, just as Göran, that SweDev is a very good initiative, and especially as it seems to be able to consolidate the field and to increase or improve efforts to contact policy. And I think the mapping efforts that are being done this conference and also this study is very interesting. I recognize a lot of the conclusions that preliminary conclusions that are done within the study from where I sit within policy. I mean, the gap between policy and research is an ongoing challenge, and I think it lacks simple answers. And it's a very large subject. It's about the relevance of research. It's about communicating this research. And from my end, which has also been lifted here, is the capacity of the policy community to observe research findings and importantly to translate them into effective policy. But I think also important to remember that there's a strong basis for talking about our common grounds here. And about the mutual benefits. It's really a win-win situation. From the policy side, policy wants to conduct evidence-based policies, and a lot of research want to play a role, make a difference. And this concerns societies like ours and elsewhere. In a lot of places, academia struggles against taboos and repression and disinformation. So I think we are in a good position to make this work. So from my own perspective, my own point of view, I see the following challenges and opportunities. It has been mentioned here, the lack of capacity within bureaucracy, within government bureaucracy, to absorb research. Not enough time to read, to understand, analyze, discuss. And this has to do with high workloads, as Göran pointed to. There's just so much going on all the time, and not enough place and time to dive deeply into research. I think also a factor is, I mean, you mentioned the role of management. I think one might even formulate in terms of our technocratic culture, where there is not spaces and places for reading. I mean, we did have a discussion, for instance, in our department about a quiet corner with comfortable chairs, just to be able to read in a more comfortable place and at the workplace, at the desk. But it didn't really happen. So there's not really an environment with such places and spaces. And according to this technocratic culture, officials are often seen merely as parts of a large machinery where each part has a limited task, and it's not a given that for the separate official or responsible for a dossier, taking a broader or deeper perspective is necessarily promoted, and that the specific official has anything to gain for going that extra mile. So I think this has to do with technocratic culture, but you know, this differs in some places, in some departments, according on some issues. This cross-cutting and more deep diving approaches are promoted, but it's not the whole picture. I think also a factor which is a bit broader is a certain lack of personal mobility. I think this applies to Swedish society in general, actually. But here we talk about personal mobility between academia and policy. And I think this goes for both directions, and this strengthens prevailing cultures on both ends. And again, in a Swedish context, it seems that such mobility is not necessarily conducive for career advancement. And I think this is in some contrast to, if you still look at, for instance, the US, and there are also other examples. If I look at specifically my ministry, because of course I cannot talk for the whole of the government offices, the employees at MFA are often for a quite limited time in Stockholm. You do periods of, say, 4-5 years. You might be in Stockholm for well, maybe up to 7-8 years, then you go out again, and you might stay out for up to 10 years, and then you come back. And each position you have a new dossier and new portfolio, so there's a certain lack, therefore, of anchorage in Swedish realities, and certainly knowledge and context in Swedish academia. And it also gives at hand the fact that officials are generalists and have to change issues all the time, which also probably increases the technocratic factor or impulse. And also the MFA, if I again talk specifically about my ministry, in an international perspective, it's a pretty small ministry, and luckily, as for development issues, development cooperation issues, we have SEDA as a main expert body to turn to when we need expert knowledge, and this is what the Swedish management model looks. In other countries, development cooperation is conducted directly from ministries, which would then attract more capacities within the ministry. I think among solutions, I mean, if you turn the above factors around, you also have hunches about what could be solutions. I think further solutions are more of informal platforms, and I would like to stress the word informal for regular meetings and communication, personal contacts and visits. And I think also there should be more of a regular reciprocal invitation for briefings on current issues. I think from the outside, the government offices might look like something which is difficult to approach, but I think one should, as an academic, be less respectful of that and really seek contacts, points of contact within the ministries, including the foreign ministry. And also, I think an important point is that as development research is broadened, there are, of course, few academic disciplines that are not potentially relevant for these kinds of issues. And similarly, there are few ministries which are irrelevant to global development challenges. And this is, of course, in line with the government policy for global development. We call it in Swedish PGU, Politiken för global utveckling, which points out that the full spectrum of government offices should be involved. And as for ministries, for instance, responsible for the different SDGs, one can argue that only 2 of the 17 squarely fall on the MFA. And other prominent ministries are for instance, the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry for Social Affairs, and even the Ministry of Finance. So I think this calls for, if we talk about policy, context policy, academia, for broader contacts between academia and policy. So it should include the entire government offices, if we talk about the government offices, Regeringskansliet, and not only MFA. And an idea from myself, a personal reflection, is what if one can imagine some kind of regular broad gathering, conference perhaps, that brings together Swedish academia and policy on a broad base, maybe biannual. And I think also, and this is another personal reflection under the heading of solutions, that there's probably more room within the MFA and probably government offices generally for more systemic thinking in terms of establishing support points for contacts with and knowledge about current research in Sweden, but not only. I would personally see as useful such support points in each one of MFA's functional and geographic departments. We have, as you might be aware of, we have both functional departments at the MFA, such as the UN Department, Global Agenda, Human Rights, International Law, Trade, Investment, and so forth. And all of these functional departments, as well as geographic departments, notably on Africa and Asia, they deal with a lot of development relevant issues. So such network could represent a useful entry point for contacts with academia, and a network also of sorts. This is, again, I stress my own thinking.
I think Anders, maybe I need to practice the not being so respectful to you already now, because we're running out of time. And as we
Okay.
said, there will be opportunities to provide more examples in the discussion after. But
Yeah.
I would like to, and thank you very much, Anders. I think there were several insightful thoughts, but also some really concrete suggestions that I think we should definitely consider for the future. For now, I would like to invite Peter Sörbom from Concord to provide your thoughts on the question.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Yes, thank you very much for the invitation to participate here in this panel, and thank you very much for conducting this study. I think it's very interesting and useful, and in a broader sense, putting together this network. I will come back to some thoughts on that. Just a brief presentation of Concord, Sweden. I work as the head of policy and advocacy at Concord, Sweden. Been doing that for a little bit more than 10 years. And Concord, Sweden is a platform of CSO organizations. At the moment, 76 different ones. And we have as a primary role to contribute to the public debate and through dialogue with decision makers, the CSO perspective on global development and issues included in that broader term. We do so also by monitoring and trying to influence Swedish and EU policy making with that CSO perspective. And with global development in a broad sense, I mean that we not only work on Swedish and EU development cooperation, but also follow closely the 2030 agenda, the policy coherence for development issue, gender equality, business and human rights, and so forth. So we work very broadly, and we have different coalitions of members following all those issues, and it could be useful for participants here to know that as a follow-up. And we also see that many policies that affect Swedish decision making is located at the EU level. So we are part of Concord Europe, which gathers more than 2,600 organizations. Could be useful to know that as well. And I would like to start with many of my thoughts coincide with the findings that was presented. I would like to start with some thoughts on how we have been engaging and collaborating or making use of researchers and research basically in order to get some ideas on how to move forward. There is a difference, and I think that is interesting to see in what way practitioners as us as civil society can make use of research, and then on the other side how we can collaborate and find fora and ways of talking to each other basically about current political issues. First, an ongoing example. Here in Sweden, we do have from time to time an active debate on the impact of aid. And we have felt for recent years that we need to look into and map the existing research on the impact of aid and different aid modalities in order to move away from a polarized debate, a simplified debate. So that has been our role as a platform to come together as CSOs and look at what is the current research saying. And that we do that continuously, and we do foresee that for the next year that will be a focus for us. Another example of how we work and create links and collaboration with researchers is the issue of PCSD, policy coherence for sustainable development. Anders touched upon that, mentioning that a lot of policies are outside the MFA, and Göran also highlighted the need for interdisciplinary approach, because this is a complex chain of decision making, a complex chain of impact. So what we did as Concord Sweden is that we did a mapping of existing research on the issue of PCD and how different areas contribute or hamper sustainable development. So we did that looking at not only case studies in certain African countries regarding trade policy, but also the mechanisms as such within different EU countries to improve ways of do work coherent. But perhaps more interesting is that as part of Concord Europe, we initiated a collaboration with researchers from Netherlands, Italy, and Luxembourg to see in what way we can make better use of existing research on the matter of PCD. Because I didn't mention it in the beginning, but the role we have in putting forward the CSO perspective and monitoring the commitments of EU countries and Sweden, we do that by producing and launching reports, organizing capacity building seminars on certain issues, and we have an ongoing dialogue with decision makers on different levels. So we felt that we need to improve how our advocacy messages and our reports are being, has a foundation and has a link with current research. So these are some of the initiatives. I can mention a couple of more, but I would say that first and foremost, and this links to what Göran mentioned, we have been using research and policy briefs and analysis from ODI, ECDPM, the Swedish Institute for European Policy Studies, the Danish Institute for Human Rights, in order to look at how the 23rd Agenda is linked to different human rights. So this has been examples. I'm not saying that we do this continuously, but we're trying to highlight that there are ways of bridging this gap between practitioners, in this sense, the CSO community and researchers. And I would like to also mention that good examples of creating that link is that we, at least well, a couple of times in recent years, have invited and have had the participation of researchers on human rights and on gender equality in parliamentary seminars, in order to give that perspective at the same time as we put forward findings from our reports. So there are some challenges and room for improvement, but just to highlight where we have felt that we have created that bridge or that collaboration. And looking at the sort of the main points or recommendations, I think most of them, I feel, are part of the presentation that we just heard. I would say that, of course, time is a factor, human resources is a factor for us as CSOs in order to follow and be engaged in what the current research is saying about the issues we work with. And then I would say that the packaging and the way research is communicated is key in ways how you put it forward in a more accessible manner. I would also stress that it would be much welcome to see a way of linking research with the current debate. Not only put forward the current research, but really look at ways, points of entrance in order to be relevant for the current debate, and put forward a desk study, a summary of what the existing research says. I also would like to welcome a more active participation of researchers in the ongoing debate. I think the example of the polarized debate on aid, where you can hear a lot of false information, where complex reality is reduced to easy messages. I think decision makers, we do listen to researchers, and I think it would be very useful to have a better debate on development cooperations with the participation of researchers. So that is a message from us, which we would like to follow up on. And finally, I already mentioned it, but creating forums such as this, and not only sort of make use of research that is out there, but really try to have a sort of continuous dialogue, find fora and ways of collaborating would be very useful for us, I would say.
Thank you very much, Peter. We will soon open up for discussion. There are already a couple of questions in the chat. One thing that I had in mind while listening to the interventions of Göran, Peter, and Anders, and this is more a question of thought to Janet and Anna. is there a risk if we adapt too much, we become too relevant for policy, that we can be criticized from the research community, from the other side, so to say, that we're not doing independent research that is, so to say, free? I mean, I would say, based on my own experience, that I face that discussion quite a lot at my home institution. So is there a risk here that we become if we aim for what we're discussing now, will become too relevant for policy and open for criticism from the research community? Yes, Janet.
For me, and yeah, no, definitely. And I've heard so many cases. Well, me being in academia, and also having been in the practitioner side, and now in the academia, now I'm kind of like in the mid of it, and it's definitely something that is not promoted. Like Göran was saying in the beginning, there's always a frustration from going to one side to another, and it's not promoted so much being a researcher in the practitioner side, because then people think that you are too slow, and are you really like, can you take quick decisions and all that you have gone too much to that front. And in the academia, definitely not too much promoted that you have a practitioner background. And even for myself, when I searched for a PhD position after having been in the practitioner side, it was really difficult to get some type of acknowledgement that it was some type of valuable information I had gained during my practitioner years. So I think it can be this. Yeah, there are cultures, and we need to be aware of that. But I think we can close the gap definitely, and we should definitely work more together. But at the same time, being aware and trying to push the different cultures in both in academia and in the practitioner world.
Thank you. And Anna?
Yeah, I agree, and I also think very interesting inputs from all the other practitioners to group them. But I also think it's important to remember that even though there is a need to package research in a different way, we also have to understand and manage in some way that researchers often depend on funding that is based on being published in peer-reviewed journals or similar. So it's really important that to understand that side as well, and to see what's possible within that context as well.
Yep. Thank you very much. I would like to ask a question to Peter, and it's I mean, one purpose of SweDev is to close the gap, to be more engaged, and to have more contact also with policymakers and politicians. So, I mean, you touched upon that in your presentation or in your reflections, Peter, but what advice would you like to give to SweDev in terms of like how you successfully approach politicians? Because I mean, that's one of the main activities also of Concord, and something that we in SweDev also would like to develop.
It's a good question, and looking at sort of evaluations and responses we have been receiving from the political parties recently, is that you as civil society are not being brief enough, not to the point enough. You are perhaps sometimes coming in too late in the process. You need to have an understanding of how many steps earlier you need to engage with certain policy-making processes. So the packaging, the timing, and the ability to be brief and constructive and concrete, those are responses that we have been receiving from the MFA, the political parties, and the government, because time is a factor. And we heard from one party representative that there is he did a brief overview of how many hours or minutes each level of decision makers can give to a report. And when it comes down to a state secretary, it's 10, 15 minutes, 30 minutes if it's interesting enough. And that has consequences on how you package it. That is part of the answer to your question. Then I think there is a need to look into ways of creating that ongoing dialogue for us to make decision makers aware of current research, and not only when you have a study in place, but really have a dialogue with them that will enhance the possibility for you to be listened to.
Thank you. Wise advice. I already have a couple of people on the list now, so I will open up for a discussion. I see here some people don't find the raise your hand button. And on my list now, I have Fredrik, Elisabeth, Gunilla, Jesper, and now also Annika, who can't find the raise your hand button. So I will try to take note, but please, Jonathan and Anna in the Secretariat, help me if I seem to forget someone. But Fredrik, please, go ahead.
Thank you for this exciting seminar. I'm Fred Soderbaum from University of Gothenburg and also involved in SweDev. I was struck by the comments, well, by all of the three panelists, but especially Göran and Anders spoke about both general knowledge and specific knowledge. So I think that the interaction between research and policy becomes somewhat different if you speak about a general issue compared to a specific issue. And if we talk about, I think that SweDev can invite and contribute to interaction regarding general issues such as do no harm, impact of aid, relationship between poverty and conflict, and what have you. When we speak about more specific issues about how can research be relevant for a particular aid strategy or a specific issue that policymakers are working with at a particular time. Now, to match research and policy regarding a particular aid strategy, that's quite difficult and challenging to be relevant, it seems. So my question to Göran is, it seems to me that the general issues are much less frequently discussed among policymakers, and there is no interest. Do you agree?
Göran, you're challenged.
And what can we do? Because we are all, everyone believes that the interaction between policy and research ought to be about the specific issues. And that's very difficult because you don't have the time when you formulate the aid strategy. How can you find a researcher doing research on that particular issue? Well, SweDev can provide a forum where you can identify the researcher, but I mean, SweDev as a network cannot, well, we can facilitate, but then you need the interaction with a few specific researchers in order to get some relevant advice.
Thank you, Fredrik. Göran, would you like to respond? And maybe
Sure.
also Anders, if it regards strategy, I believe that is also relevant for Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So Göran, please go ahead first.
Yeah, on something that hasn't been mentioned, maybe how SIDA has organized some of its connection to academia. That is what we call help desks. So most of our major themes, they have a help desk, which is normally run by some academic or academic affiliated institution. These are procured according to government guidelines and so on. So you win it based on a bid and assessed. But for these kind of more specific inputs that you need if you prepare a specific contribution or if you are involved in developing a country strategy where you need a conflict analysis or something similar, that's one source of input. And these guys who sit there normally are expected to have a broader overview of the research field and what can be sort of handed over to see that. So I think it's an important research link actually for SEDA. Maybe we don't think of it as such, but it's we spend quite a lot of money if you bring it all together on these help desks. So for your network, I think these help desk guys, they are a piece to consider, and probably all aren't your favorites and so on, but quite influential. I should also clarify that just when it was on academic journal was mentioned that SEDA do nowadays, after efforts of some of us, have a subscription to the EBSCO 13,000 journals or so, and it wasn't more expensive than $30,000 for 700 people. So I don't know if it works for a civil society network to do something similar. But maybe it's not. Then how often do people go and use it? I don't know, frankly. But at least it's not impossible to reach most of them. On the general level, yeah, maybe I should shut up now. We could come back to that. But how to engage with the sort of overall policy level, I would have some ideas about how we could be stronger as a kind of Team Sweden thinking on that.
Can I just reply 1 minute?
But Fredrik, I think we have quite a lot of people on our list, and I think that also we have to look at this seminar as like raising the issues that we would then like to come back to through Anna's study. I have 10 people on my list, so
you have to chat to me, Fredrik.
Yeah, so I would be a bit rude here also to let several people speak and ask their questions. I don't know, first Anders, did you want to comment upon Fredrik's questions? Yes, I also think it's
I'm not sure how it relates to strategy issues actually, so I don't think I have a concrete comment.
Okay, thank you. Then we will go on. We had a question from Elizabeth Olivius in the chat. Elizabeth, would you like to raise the question here to everyone?
Sure, I can repeat it so you don't have to scroll through the chat. When I was listening to Anna's presentation of the tentative findings, I was wondering how practitioners navigate finding. I mean, what is development research to them? Who are the development researchers they might want to interact with, given that we don't know ourselves, and it's at most universities that's not a coherent category of people or research with a label. It can be found, as someone said, across many disciplines. So how do practitioners think about that? Where do they look? What appears on their radar and not, and why is that?
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. A relevant question. Anna, do you want to reply?
Yeah, I can reply. Thank you, Elizabeth. That's definitely something we want to look more into in the more in-depth discussions that we are going to have and already started. And but as mentioned, and as we can see already in the study, it does seem that it's a matter of more informal contacts and who you know and what networks you belong to that matters. If you as a researcher will kind of get your foot into the policy table, as we spoke about yesterday at the public session then. But I definitely take this question with me, and hopefully we'll look more into it when we continue with the study.
Thank you, Anna. Janet.
Yeah, just to compliment, we didn't in the study or the survey question ask like development research and are you using development research? It's a broad question, and are you using research? And then everyone can kind of define if it is development. And what the survey was sent to development practitioners, so it was sent to people who are working with development practice. So that's kind of, and then how they use research. So it's not that they are only looking for development research. And so just as a response to that question.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Then I have Gunilla Eitren from the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, having a question also on the accessibility of research. Would you like to pose your question? No, I don't see her in the audience anymore. There is a question in the chat. Yeah, she left already, Jonathan Rice here. So then we move on to Jesper Sundevall.
Hi, thank you so much. So Jesper Sundevall, let me introduce myself just saying I'm a researcher at Lund University, Social Medicine and Global Health, and also part of the steering group of SweDev since a week or so quite new to this, but great to be involved. Let me share a couple of reflections. They're not really questions to anybody, but people are welcome to comment if they want to. I think, I have moved myself, like Janet, between working for SIDA and working as a researcher, a bit back and forth. And I think if you as a researcher want to influence policy, or if we want to call it policy, or we can call it even programming, I think relationship building is critical. Like the question raised previously, how do you get your foot in? Well, you need to build that relationship, and you need to want to do this as a researcher. It's nothing that's going to get thrown on you most of the time. Research rarely says something which is of relevance to a program officer at SIDA. I mean, at least not my research. Doesn't say anything that is just, here's the evidence, go out and do your programming. It needs to be deciphered, and it's rarely answering the question that that person is sitting with right now. So I think there's an overbelief in products such as peer review publication, but also these policy briefs. I mean, they're not necessarily answering the question that needs to be answered. They might answer interesting questions, and you might sort of explain it in a simple way, but is it the right question to answer? So how can we do this? Well, I think, let me give you a very concrete example. When I worked for SIDA in Lusaka from 2015 to 2018, we were grappling with the question of how to advance SRHR, sexual and reproductive health and rights, within the framework of universal health coverage reforms. Going back to work as a researcher, I took that with me. They have that question, how can we advance this? And we formulated it as a research question. To what extent is sexual and reproductive health and rights included in universal health coverage reform? And it ended up being a piece, two master thesis work during the last semester, which tried to answer this question in 51 countries. And that, of course, we're taking with us now, feeding back to SIDA, because we know it's a very concrete question they're grappling with. It's just one example, but you need to also be prepared to formulate your research questions in response to what is the question being asked by the people at SIDA. And of course, there is a time lag here, and you can't do that overnight, but it's definitely doable. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jesper. Just on the help desk, there is a comment now in the chat, but I also know that we actually have people from the help desk here, so there's not like a huge divide. We have people here in the seminar also from representing or being part of the help desk.
I'm on the help desk.
Yeah, okay. And I also think that we have Linda here from the help desk. Yes, so then Marie Juriso.
Marie just left.
Okay, that was unfortunate. I just saw her, but then she left before she got the word. So then I have Annika Rabo.
Okay. It was just a comment, since I've been working on development issues since the 1970s and very actively also in the 1980s. I'm a social anthropologist, both in policy practice and in development research. And the issues and the problems of miscommunication and who can use whom for what purposes, they seem to be fairly similar. What's different is that there's so many more people, both on the research side and also on the organizations and civil society and different kinds of bureaucracies. So how do we, I don't think we can ever solve the sort of the miscommunication and the lack of fit because we actually do have different interests very often, but we can think of new and strategic ways of how to collaborate. And that's why I think I'm very, very happy about this network. I'm very excited to be a professor emeritus and to be allowed to be part of such a nice network. So thank you, and I look forward to more interesting things. Thank you.
Thank you, Annika. I think indeed it is important with a long-term perspective on these issues as well. It's not a new phenomenon, absolutely not. Now I have Cecilia Strand.
Yes, hi everyone. Cecilia Strand from Uppsala University, and it was a question for Concord. And I think it comes back to a discussion that we had in one of the meetings yesterday, and sort of having a seat at a table. And I was wondering, how do they go about, I mean, the process of selecting who to work with, and how do you guys go about identifying? Because I know from personal experiences that it often comes down to what personal network a single individual have, and that has a great impact who you tend to invite, who you tend to work with, and sort of how these personal networks have emerged. So I'm kind of curious about the process before having researchers as assisting in fueling whatever process that you're involved in.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Peter, please.
Yeah, very good question. Different answers depending on the examples I was mentioning. Looking at the ways how we worked with researchers on a European level, that boils down to connections that the CSO platforms in the individual countries had in the Netherlands, in Luxembourg, and in Italy. They were aware of researchers doing research on the PCD mechanisms and certain specific areas such as trade policy and in Zambia and in other African countries. Can't remember exact which ones, but so it comes down to connections that CSOs in those countries had with or knowledge of researchers that had research linked to what we were working with. Looking at the researchers that we have invited to panels in seminars in the parliament, also similar response. We from Googling and finding research that was relevant to people in the CSO community having a connection or experience of working with certain researchers in the past. So we knew of it through our platform, since we do have 76 organizations. So that's how it came about, the collaboration or the participation. And I saw your question in written as well. It's not a continuous collaboration. We do it from time to time. So there's no network that is set up in order to create that bridge or collaboration. It comes from time to time, this collaboration.
Thank you, Peter. Then I have Jonas Evalds on the list. Jonas, can you hear us?
Sorry. Yes, I'm Peter and then Jonathan. Okay, hey, everybody, I'm Jonas Ewald from Peace and Development Research at Linnaeus University. A really exciting discussion and so much rich views that we really need to bring together. My reflection is I've also been working in the field as a researcher and teacher since the early 1990s for some 30 years. And we have discussed these issues back and forth in different settings, and nothing is really new. The frustration is to say, but there are some new things which I think is interesting, and that's the atmosphere and that we meet now. We talked yesterday about this very complex field, which is related to almost, we talked about in scientific or the theory of science, we talk about the two nations or two societies, the natural science and the social sciences. Here we have more like two nations, the practitioners and the researchers, and how do these two nations collaborate? And we could also see it as an ecosystem, as we talked about it yesterday. There are so many different actors on both sides. And I like this presentation, I think it was Anders who said that, describing the perspective from the individual person that are trying to do something as being part of a large machinery and just trying to facilitate that machinery, that industry. And I think that's exactly the same view we have as individual researchers and teachers as well. We see ourselves as part of the large scientific industry. And I think the challenge here is that these two industries, these two nations have completely different setup of incentive structures, because it's not at all something positive for your career if you're in academia to collaborate or to participate in this type of seminars. If I go to my head of department or our dean and ask, what have you been doing today? And I say, I'm doing this. Oh, why don't you concentrate on the real thing, what you're paid for? Because this is not something that build it's perceived to build our careers and vice versa. And I think this is really what we have to work on. On the one hand, changing these incentive structures at the macro level, and then think about how could we at the more micro level work together and find practical platforms where we could interact with each other. And I think there is a lot of these things that's come up here. And I think from I mean, you describe it from a from a practitioner perspective, that you don't see who to engage with, particularly considering that people are circulating. And I think it's the same for us from the research side. We don't know really how the policy process works. And when we get to know somebody, that person is getting out, and we have to start again building the relations. And I think here is something we could work much more with, and to make both structures more visible and see it as capacity building in the long run, because we're needing to build the capacity of research to be relevant for policy making. And in the same way, what we as researchers do, we are teaching also. So we teach next generation of the potential capacity of staff in the civil society and even maybe in also on the implementer side. So I think we really have a lot of things in common, but it's very difficult on the current situation to find the common platform. So my question or reflection to you is, if we should bring the two most important points with us from a practitioner side, what we should work with in SweDev in order to facilitate this process, what would your most important, pressing suggestion be?
Thank you, Jonas. I am not sure that we will have time for that round. I have two more people on my list, and I will ask you to be very brief. But the first person on the list is Anders, so maybe you can also take the opportunity to answer Jonas' question to you here. And then I have Bent Jørgensen, and then I will draw a line in the debate. So please, Anders.
Thank you. Yes, do you hear me now?
Yes.
I think one way of forcing more development research into policy is to make place for it in government policy, and as you know, there's a recurring government bill on research, and the last bill in 2016 did not have much in it as for development research. I mean, even the word utvecklingsforskning wasn't mentioned, and I think my perception is that more groundwork can be done at universities to help the inputs from universities contain clear points about these kinds of issues. So these issues, global issues, along the width of policy areas, is in this document and formulates and helps to form a government policy. And this in itself is a reason to increase interaction between policy and research. And as for Jonas or input, I think it's really important point about incentive structures. They are there, and I would like to see them less pronounced. And of course, I would like to see more of personal mobility between the planets.
Thank you very much, Anders. And the third of my former teachers, please, Bent Jørgensen, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Good to see you, Kajsa.
Good to see you too.
Over there. I'll just, Bent Jørgensen from SGS in Gothenburg. Just 2 points. This distinction between doers and thinkers, or policymakers and researchers, it's really a construction. I think it's actually much more fluffy, and these two that really go into each other. And I think that the discussion we've had here with the participants from both sides really show that very clearly, right? We really migrate between these two, and I think it's important in the sense that when it comes to finding, if we say allies, people to talk to, I really find very often that there are people within the doer community that I can talk to more easily than others, and people who have an understanding of the research side, but also share, if we talk specifically about development research, share the same understanding of, for instance, the importance of context, the importance of grounded knowledge and so on, which I do not necessarily find in the research community, but which I might find in the doer community, if we say so. And therefore, it's, to look for these allies is very important, I think, and just to break down these two categories of doers and thinkers. And then I think that what you say, Jonas, I would like to dispute a little, at least nuance a little bit what you say, because I think even though we sit on the same island here literally sit on the same island here in Gothenburg, I want to differ a little bit. I think the incentives mechanisms are different, that's true, but they are also the same in a way. I think that if I look at the work I've been doing for SEDA or for different practitioners and together with them, I think a lot of what I've done for these guys and done together with these guys has been extremely useful in my research and my role as a teacher. I mean, I wouldn't be the same, I can guarantee you, I wouldn't be the same lecturer, I wouldn't be the same scholar, researcher, if I had not worked together with the practitioners and the policymakers at different levels, in, you know, from national, global well, I've been working a lot in Vietnam, and there I can tell you that there I mean, I have done a lot of things there that I have had use for in my teaching and so on. So I think that bridge is very important to nurture, really, and say that we are not really so different. We are not really so different in incentives. We have a lot of mutual benefit from each other that we should nurture and be aware of. That's all I want to say.
Thank you very much, Bent. There are several questions and suggestions that still haven't been answered or reflected upon, but I see this as a good opportunity for Anna and Janet to know about things to take on board in the future, in the coming work with the study, and to finish and complete the study. For now, since we are 1 minute past the time to finish this seminar, I would just like to thank everyone who participated. Really interesting discussions, really engaged. So nice to have everyone from the different sectors or the different planets or islands here together. And I'm sure there will be plenty of reasons to meet again and continue this discussion. So for our external guests, a big thank you from the SweDev network. And to the internal members for the members of SweDev, now we take a break in our conference, and please look at the email sent out by Jonathan for the link to the next item on the agenda in our conference. Thank you very much, and bye.